John Barker, an emerging leader with the AFCEA Rockbridge Shenandoah chapter. This podcast episode's sponsor, GeneX, is a proud new business of the southwestern Virginia region. GeneX uses the power of innovation, community, and energy investment to propel the future growth of our cities. Learn more at www.genexsolar.com.
All right, everyone. I think we're about ready to go. So I appreciate everyone coming tonight. Would like to go ahead and thank you all for that up front. Just want to go over a little bit about what we're going to be doing tonight. My name is Jeff Thompson. I am the president of the AFCEA Rockbridge Shenandoah chapter that's here locally. Our moderator for this evening is the director for the Virginia Innovation Accelerator over at Buena Vista, Nickie Hawkins. And so Nickie is going to be introducing our panel in just a second. Up front, I want to tell you that our two organizations have come together and formed up something called the Industry Advisory Board. We are promoting small business development as well as other initiatives around our local community and the region here. And so the topic that we're going to be addressing tonight is on rural smart city development and business applications of it. And so there has been some recent developments that our featured speaker is going to tell you about in just a second. So thank you again for coming, and I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Nickie Hawkins. Thank you.
Thank you. With no further ado, I would like for Jeff to give the microphone to Kyle, who is actually my husband, and our lovely bartender is my oldest daughter, family affair. And let the panel introduce themselves. If you all on the panel would give a little bit about your background and how you relate to the topic professionally with what you do, rural smart cities. Thank you.
So hi everyone, my name is Kyle Hawkins. I work with Arista Networks. For those my age and beyond, we're not the record company, although we do get a lot of people auditioning and emailing to us. We got our start in the data center, so we do data center technologies for high performance computing, high frequency trading, and so forth. I came to Arista from Amazon Web Services, so I was there 5.5 years. And prior to that, I was with Cisco Systems for 18 years. And almost my whole career has been spent in the public sector, working with cities and mostly rural as well. So it's great to meet you.
Hi, I'm Tom Roberts. I'm Director of Community Development for the City of Buena Vista. So right down the road from here. Buena Vista is a city with about 6,600 people. And so as Community Development Director, I do all the land development, review, planning, zoning, that sort of thing, as well as helping with various revitalization projects, parks, and different things like that.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. My name is Michael Dunaway. I am at the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, or NIST, as we call it. I'll say a little bit more about it in a bit. But I made one important decision in my life, and that was, so I grew up on a farm in Missouri, and a lot of chickens, a lot of fruit trees, and a lot of baling hay. And I applied to the Naval Academy, to be blunt, to get out of town. And so, because I knew I didn't want to bale hay for the rest of my life. Now, I will tell you that there were plenty of times on midwatches out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean where I was thinking, boy, it would be great to be baling hay about now. But anyway, I grew up on a farm. I have a real affinity for rural areas and small towns where I grew up in the areas that I came to know and love. I did a full career, I went to the United States Naval Academy, did a full career in the service. I retired in 2000, and I went to work at the Office of Naval Research. So I got into science and technology work and high technology at the time, a lot of modeling and simulation work. And I stayed at ONR for about 7 years. And then after 9/11, a few years after 9/11, not immediately, but I went over to the science and technology director at the Department of Homeland Security. And I got very much involved. I stood up a program in community resilience. So my particular focus from that point on was really how do we make communities safer and more resilient against, obviously we were concerned about terrorism in those days, but the bigger issues I think for all of us have to do with everything having to do with security of our communities, security of our families, of our roadways, critical infrastructure systems, and agricultural security, which is a really big issue, has been for many years, and you're probably more familiar with that technically than I am. But I worked at the S&T Directorate Science and Technology Directorate for about 5 years. And then via a couple of other routes, I wound up at the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, and I lead the program there in smart cities. I've been involved with that kind of technology work for about 10 years. I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. But a lot of our focus now has been transitioning away from the problems caused by our title, which is smart cities. A, we're redefining smart, and B, we're talking about different kinds of cities. So it isn't just metropolitan area, it's all cities. And so I'll share a little bit more on that as we go on.
Hi, I'm Tamra Lipscomb, and I'm the Information Systems Technology Director at Mountain Gateway Community College. But this is really my second or third career. I started out in technology too many years to count now, but I always joke and say I got into this because I could spell PC. And that's how I got started in just computers in general. Spent a lot of time at an Army base working, and then moved on to commercial world, worked at AT&T for a long time, and had an opportunity to move here and reinvent myself, and higher ed is my passion. So this whole idea of smart cities and how we get students to move into a new career that is exciting and has big impact is exciting to me.
Thank you, panelists, and I think we have an impressive panel here for discussion, and let's give them a round of applause just for volunteering their time. Thank you all. Please hold your questions. We're going to get to that phase, but first, and Jeff, you might have to give the microphone back. He really wants to have that microphone tonight. Thank you. We're going to start with Mr. Dunaway. Thank you so much. So, Mr. Dunaway, can you please provide us a brief overview of the NIST GCTC effort, including the local community technology working group?
Thank you. Very glad to do that. So the National Institute of Standards and Technologies is the research laboratory of the U.S. Department of Commerce. And we're located we have two sites. My home parent site is in Gaithersburg, Maryland. It's about 15 miles north of Washington, D.C. And it's a really large facility with a lot of very exotic technology development work going on. The other site that we have is in Boulder, Colorado, and they do a lot of work with communications technologies and a lot of work actually with NOAA and with the National Weather Service because of their location up there. But the work that I do and the program that I lead at NIST has been focused on enabling cities to integrate advanced technologies, which, as you all know, are moving really rapidly. We have a lot of displays right behind us here on the table. The focus of the program, which has been in existence since 2014, has been really twofold. One, to introduce the opportunities that advanced technologies offer for cities to enhance city operations, business models, quality of life for citizens, and safety and security having to do with community resilience and efficiencies. And then the other part of it for the program goal was to eliminate duplication of efforts. And this was what we saw when we really stood the program up in 2014, was that cities were doing just remarkable work in technology development, integration. A lot of small businesses and a lot of good-sized businesses were involved in developing programs that were enhancing cities' ability to improve operations and efficiencies and security. Problem was that every one of those projects, by and large, was a one-off. And so cities and communities across the country were making enormous investments doing the same thing that a community 20 miles away was doing also, or 200 miles away or on the other side of the country. So the goal was to try to build a program where we could share information, learn from each other, and identify opportunities to scale technologies so that cities would not have to reinvent the wheel, but also that they would be able to learn from each other and advance the tech integration process and the business models at the local level in a much more efficient and less obtrusive fashion with a lot less financial investment that didn't need to happen. So that was really the motivation, and ergo the initiation of this program in the Department of Commerce rather than somewhere else. That's been principally what we've been doing. As I said a couple of minutes ago, two of the challenges that I've been dealing with since I've been at NIST now for almost 4 years, leading this program, but I had been involved with it since 2014 when the program was initially stood up. And I was one of the city volunteers. My hometown is in Annapolis, Maryland, and I've been working with the Emergency Management Agency and the State Emergency Management Agency. So I was very much involved in how we build resilience at the community level, but I'd been doing it as basically a volunteer with a city interested in this. Over a period of time, I got more and more embedded with the Smart Cities movement and the initiation of the work that we were doing at NIST. And then the opportunity came available about 4 years ago for me to take over the leadership of this program. Very glad that I did that because it's put me in contact, quite frankly, with everything from metropolitan areas in Los Angeles and New York City all the way down to small communities such as this one, and more importantly, with universities that are training the next generation of leadership and the next generation of citizens, scientists, and researchers. And that's where a particular interest of mine has been over the last several years, and it's something we can discuss as time goes on here during the course of the evening. So I'll stop with it there. I can talk endlessly about this, but at any rate, that's a good starting point, I think.
I feel like we could listen endlessly. We have a lot to learn. Thank you so much. If you'll pass the microphone to Kyle, I would like Kyle and Tom and Tamra to talk about challenges in the private sector, in economic development, and in education that they have faced in a rural setting.
So there are many that I've seen, and it's funny, I was just saying before, just from our perspective as a family, I always joke that we've been social distancing for 20 plus years now because we live in Troutville, Virginia. But what we struggle with in technology is a lot of times the whoever it is, whether it's a small city, a small town, and training their workforce is actually retaining them. And a good example that jumps out to me thinking about that is the Institute for Advanced Learning and Research down in Danville. If you've never been there or never seen the building, it looks like it's plucked out of San Jose, but right in Danville, Virginia. Very impressive. And some of the networking constructs and some of the technology that they would offer up there are extremely impressive. However, what would happen is some of the engineers that they would employ, they would get trained and so forth, and be some of the sharpest that we would work with. If you think about it, the young engineers are always wanting to learn the latest and greatest technology and aren't afraid. But then they would move on. So, and particularly from there, they would move to either Greensboro, Raleigh, Charlotte, some of the bigger cities, and so forth. So that's one of the biggest challenges that we've seen is the actual attainment of some of these, some of the people that we're training.
Yeah, workforce development is certainly, and worker retention is certainly an issue we see too. Nickie, so is your question more geared towards what are challenges that we face as a locality that maybe could be helped by sort of smart cities technologies? Or?
Yes, so what have been a barrier for you growing as far as being able to bring top technologies or, like Kyle said, retain workforce in a rural setting?
Yeah, I think that is a good question because smaller localities definitely, it's rare that they're at the cutting edge of implementing, new technologies, whether it's hardware or software. And so I think that some of the challenges with technology that we see are, there's a steep development curve with some things. For a larger locality or a larger municipality, the vendor is going to be there's a lot of customization to what they're providing. So I think we're looking for off-the-shelf solutions that are easy for us to just acquire and implement. And also having products that are really tailored to a small scale, because some technology platforms, they really work best when you've got thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of users, and they're just hard or complex to implement if you're only talking about hundreds or a few thousand users. And then another thing is cost. And so how do we find something that's really a good value for us? Because we're looking at kind of the current way that we do things, which might have some known inefficiencies. But then, like if we implement new technology, are we going to? Is the marginal savings going to be enough to make it worth it? So I think those are all some things that we think about in terms of implementing new technologies.
Thank you. So Tamra?
Okay, so coming from higher ed perspective, like I see that perspective as well. We are very small, obviously being a community college, and we want to train the workforce, but we also need to partner with the workforce. And because we're small, and for me, I'm the head of my department and I'm the only full-time person in my department. So staying on top of those new technologies and then also working with business and industry leaders to find out what they really need and being able to bring that quickly can be a challenge. Cost is a challenge. So trying to find funding to bring on these new programs. But it also gives us an opportunity because we're small that we can grab a hold and bring something, sort of to market quick. I will just mention really quickly, we have our new MG Tech director here. We're just starting this new program. It's not about smart cities, but just indulge me for a moment. It could be in the future. This is an IT academy that is going to focus on cybersecurity, which will have to be huge in the smart city market or arena. And then it's also going to focus on IT technical support and cloud computing. So all that will tie in to a degree for our smart cities. And so I hope that we're starting now at like the 9th, 10th grade level, bringing in, getting some education so that by the time they can get to us for a degree, hopefully we can find a way to bring about more training for smart cities. But our challenges are the same. We're small, funding is, not always there, and we just have a lot of challenges with that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Mr. Dunaway, the program that you're talking about is so exciting, and I think people in a rural setting can suffer from thinking of smart city being San Francisco or Chicago or New York City, San Jose. Can you talk from the perspective of your background and your knowledge of the program now to encourage the people in this room and to talk about exactly what the federal government and NIST are prepared to do to make sure that rural communities embrace the idea of being smart, and what support and help are there for them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's an important question. And so I mentioned sort of in my introduction that we're in the process of defining what it means to be smart, but also redefining what it means to be a city. And for a long time, this is a problem we have had with our own nomenclature, and that is when you see smart cities, or you hear that, people think about San Francisco, or they think about Chicago or New York, or a big metropolitan area, or a metropolitan area affiliated with a large university that has a research staff available for it. We're trying to get out of that model, and we're doing it basically in two ways. One is we're trying to build what we're calling an information sharing and analysis center, an ISAC is the acronym for it, that would enable cities to find and communities, businesses, educational institutions, anybody who wanted to access or to learn what kind of technologies are available that could be transitioned right now, or could at least be explored for options and for opportunities. So we're trying to build, we are in the process right now of building an international, an information sharing and analysis center for the Smart City program at NIST. We've already got a beta test or a prototype set up. It's called opencommons.org. So it's pretty relatively easy to remember. You can query it right now, and it's got a fairly it's growing. It's a fairly good basis right now for technology programs that NIST has sponsored in the past relative to smart cities, and also connections with the people that have been involved with those. So the program originally, over the past 10 years or so, we've had as many as 240 US cities that have been involved in the Global Community Technology Challenge, or GCTC. And we also have about 40 international cities that have been involved as well. So although this is a beta that we have up right now, the potential is to really enhance the ability for information sharing, both in experience, in technology development, and in access to those technologies that other cities could gain from, any city could gain from, or any community. And we say city, when I see cities, I really mean communities, meaning rural communities, but also neighborhoods that are inside larger metropolitan areas that may be underserved, may not have resources, may not have access to 5G networks, for instance, which is another area the Communications Technology Laboratory at NIST is dealing with, is universal 5G access. Okay, so the Information Sharing and Analysis Center is one dimension. The other one, which is a particular focus of my work, is on standardizing processes and standardizing technologies. The standards development process in the United States is much different than it is, I'm learning, in the European Union or in the ASEAN region in Southeast Asia, or even in the United Nations, which has an International Telecommunications Union division in the United Nations. What happens is technologies in those organizations generally tend to write very sophisticated standards, and then the cities are required to adopt them, or the technology developers are required to adopt them. And standardization is a pretty rapid process in the EU. However, we don't do that in this country. What we do instead is that we develop standards. So I'll back up just a bit to say that the National Institute of Standards and Technologies does not write standards. That's not what we do. What we do is we build the frameworks and do a lot of the cognitive and technology research and development work that enables the business sector and at high industry levels, but all the way down to smart business, or to smaller businesses rather, to develop standards through an iterative process that then can be adopted on a voluntary basis by U.S. companies and corporations, or by communities, or by cities and nonprofit organizations. And the standards process in this country takes a lot longer to get a standard actually in place. But when it does, it has evolved as a result of a communal process where everybody has had a say in what that standard ought to look like and how it can be developed and adopted. So it's a lot more like an open standards process. Well, that's not exactly what it is, but it's a very much consensus-based voluntary program in the United States. So what we're doing, and this is a principal focus of my work now, is to begin developing standards for smart cities. And what that would enable us to do once we get to that stage is do a lot more rapid prototyping, because we will have compatible processes for developing the technologies and integrating them, but then also compatible process for employing them in terms of economic and policy objectives that cities could adopt. So those two things right there, the development of an information sharing and analysis center through opencommons.org, or on the other hand, the development of a smart city standardization process, which I'm leading now at NIST, or beginning to formulate at NIST, and to put that in place so we can advance more rapidly the way that we're going about this, from the perspective of large metropolitan areas all the way down to small rural cities and communities as well.
Thank you so much. So if you will pass the microphone to Kyle. One of the questions that came up was about retention, and I see we have some students in the room, and we're going to talk about internship opportunities as well. But our family specifically had the challenge of having someone in the career of technology and wondering, can we live and base a career out of Roanoke, Virginia? So if you can just talk briefly about that, because retention of talent is so important to these objectives.
Yeah, sure. It was a challenge when we first took that chance. So when thinking back, the driver for us was my parents were in Lynchburg, Virginia, and Nickie's parents were in Radford, Virginia, and we wanted the kids to be able to grow up near their grandparents. I worked for a Fortune 100 technology company at the time who prioritized being in the office and being present. We did have a small presence in Salem, Virginia, but moving back when we did, we knew it was moving back to a small office to where that could just be cut out and we would be out of luck at that point. So we always said that kind of mentally we had to have our bags packed and be ready to go. Probably back to Raleigh where we were years prior to that. But what we found was there was more adoption for being able to work remotely and being able to get out into some of these smaller communities. And like you're talking about with the smart city initiatives, those went down to a lot of the small towns. The town of Blacksburg is a perfect example, even though it's surrounded by a massive city in Virginia Tech. There are also some areas where they were looking to partner to figure out transit schedules and things like that. So there was a driver for it, and we noticed that the momentum was there to be able to work remotely. Then obviously COVID hits and everyone was working remotely, but now you'll see, and one of the largest ones now is Amazon requiring everyone to be back at an office now. I was with AWS for 5.5 years, and I've talked with several of my friends still over there, and they don't know what they're going to do because many of them are remote. Luckily, that because of COVID, luckily that's not quite the norm these days. So I would just encourage the students and so forth to really investigate some of the top, if technology is their forte and that's what they're going into, to really look into that, because there still is an acceptance out there for the hybrid workforce and so forth. And even though Amazon is kind of making their name for them now by requiring everyone to come back and causing an uproar there, what I've seen is it's not the norm.
Okay, thank you. So for Tom and Tamra, obviously what Mr. Dunaway said is very exciting and interesting. And so what would you need to know from him, from education and from economic development, about next steps and funding and how to bring a program like this to your areas?
Yes. So I think, there are a couple things I'm thinking about. One, as Kyle was speaking, I was really thinking about Buena Vista's efforts to attract remote workers, and that's that's one of our economic development strategies, and that's one thing that we feel like we're doing pretty well. Of course, we've got more work to do, but we are still a relatively low cost of living place. And a lot of people like living in a small town for all those kind of small town lifestyle benefits. We also have pretty good broadband availability, and we have for a number of years. So those are things that communities, I think, need to be looking at, is lifestyle. And just as an economic development strategy, there's an extent to which if you have a good quality of life, people will choose to move there, and they will figure out how to work somewhere. You know, so that's been one of our economic development strategies is looking to make it appealing, and part of that is the higher education with Mountain Gateway, and also Southern Virginia University is located in Buena Vista, and they have they have alumni that want to stay in the area, and family of alumni. So I think that's a piece of it as we think about the workforce, is thinking about the lifestyle and how to work with communities to have the broadband, have the lifestyle, and have co-working spaces too, so that you can facilitate, make it easy to be able to work remotely. You know, if you can find a company that can do that. Does that answer your question? Or?
Yes, that's great. So if you can pass it to Tamra.
Okay, so from a higher ed perspective, obviously having the curriculum in place would be great. Finding out what skills our students need to support smart cities, which I think, again, we branch off on several of those avenues right now. Cyber being, that's just one of my huge passions. So I keep saying the word cyber over and over, but that is also one of the careers out there where you have plenty of work at home opportunities in cyber. I will say, just coming from my own personal experience, I would always recommend that you go somewhere to work first in an office environment. This is just my personal experience, because then you build those connections that you need and the skills that you need from other people who are very skilled, and then you're more suited for that work at home opportunity. And again, there are plenty still there, and when we talk about retention, I think this is, again, just my take on this. Amazon may have another look at the return to office, because they're going to lose some of their workforce. And I can speak for my family members as well, who were in the office 5 days a week, but they have left to go to, you know, a hybrid or a more remote situation for that quality of life that you just mentioned. And with the actual office space available to folks, I think we can't give up on that work from home, but I think just having it hybrid would be great. But to get back to the original question, really just getting the curriculum and the skill set and finding internships or job shadowing opportunities for our students to see how smart cities really operate, not just from a book perspective, would be super.
Thank you so much.
Can I offer a comment on that? Just,
well, it was coming your way next.
Okay.
It's a perfect segue. So
Yeah.
yes, I wanted you to talk about internship opportunities
Sure.
next, please.
Well, I'll start there, because the news is not good, or at least it's stagnant at the moment. As you all recognize, we're about to have a change in administration, whatever that means. The budget process is locked up on a continuing resolution right now. So the internships and the college sponsorships at NIST are at a standstill. And I suspect that's probably true in many of the other federal agencies right now. With any luck, that dam will break sometime after the first of the year. We certainly hope it will. I would also mention, quite frankly, that my budget is locked up pretty tight as well, too. So there is a lot of projects I want to get off the ground that we are positioning ourselves to do early next year. So this discussion's timing is actually quite good, because as I've mentioned, one of my objectives. So if you brought me here to hear from me and learn about what my agency does, I came because I wanted to hear from you. To understand, this gets to the standardization process issue, but it also gets to where we should be putting technology integration efforts within NIST and within the Department of Commerce to make sure that our work at the federal level is actually supporting communities directly. I'll give you one good example. So the city of Stafford, which you probably are much more familiar with than I am. Stafford decided I think it was about 6 years ago, maybe. They had been on a path to turn the city into a laboratory for smart cities. They've been doing a lot of work in terms of traffic management, which is almost always where cities begin the smart city path. How do we solve the traffic and parking problem? So that right there is a good starting place. They've also done a lot with integrating sensor systems both for lighting economies for street lights and that kind of thing, but also sensor systems that monitor in real time environmental monitoring, pollution, noise abatement, and those kinds of things. So they have done real advanced work to make sure that their technology integration relates to the problems that the city itself has. And that's, I think, the most important starting point for any community. Solve your own problems and identify those and then prioritize them. This is the city council's problem every single year and the mayor's office problem. But the input for that and the motivation for it frequently comes from organizations and technology integrators and investors, but also developers such as you have in this room. So the input that you can have into your own community's decision processes, I think would have would position you to do what is important for you, not necessarily what is important for some other community, but what really would make a big impact in your own community. Okay, now let me offer an example real quickly of one that I think it's an area that we're beginning to focus on in the area of digital twins. And basically a digital twin is a computer model, a computer simulation of a community or of a region, a geographic area, or even of a building that basically is a very sophisticated model that has a two-way connection between the simulation itself and the real world, so that the simulation is actually modeling what the real world is seeing, and in some cases it's actually controlling it. Traffic control and traffic management is a really good example of that, particularly if you have a traffic system that changes lights to green to let fire trucks through and stops all the intersections so the ambulances, fire trucks, and emergency vehicles can get through, and then reorients itself to manage the traffic efficiently. We're very interested in identifying communities that can serve as prototypes for digital twin systems. And so just driving through here and looking at the proximity of VMI in the middle of your downtown historic district, adjacent to another well-regarded university, you have a lot of the opportunities, I think, to build a digital twin of this community that could really advance some of the goals that you yourselves may set for the community, the way you're doing right now with the modeling and the processing for the unmanned aerial vehicles that are on the table behind me. That's just an area that I would be personally interested in finding a city interested in prototyping that kind of technology. So topic for future conversation, perhaps, that we could have. And I'd be doubly interested in doing it in a way in which we began to integrate rural and agriculture dimension into the larger regional issue of a city's model, but also of a city's integration with sensor systems, with transportation management, and all those kinds of infrastructure systems as well.
Thank you so much.
I'll let that go at that.
So I would like to give the audience some time to ask questions. And if you'll just stand up, hopefully we can hear you. Say who you want to address your question to, and then we'll bring the microphone back to the panelists. And if you can just introduce yourself briefly and your background.
I'm Martin Rosendale. I'm the CEO of Shenandoah LLC and a biotechnology contractor. So I've had the privilege of working in a number of industry hubs across the country. And one of the things that I've noticed here in Southwest Virginia is that collaboration is far more likely, efficient, and effective. And I'm wondering if this is a question for all of you. Could you comment on the role of collaboration in these initiatives that you're talking about and their success?
Sure, I'll just add a brief comment relative to the GCTC. So in essence, the Global Community Technology Challenge is a really big public-private partnership between the federal government, that's me, and my office, all the way down to cities, states, cities, and regions that have participated in these development processes, programs at the community and local level, and hopefully with the goal of scaling them much more broadly so we can collaborate across regions and across state governments and local governments as well. But the collaboration is key to everything. I mentioned that one of our goals is to redefine how we think about smart. So when we started down this process 10 years ago, and I'll speak for my program, but it's true for most smart city programs, it was all about technologies. It was about sensor systems, data flows, integration of control systems, and the integration of how those interact with the population to the degree that the technology allowed. As we have gotten more and more down this path, we have recognized, and this is almost, I'd say this is pretty much universally true in the smart city world right now, including the folks in the colleagues that we have in Europe. We recognize that the technology actually is the easy part because we can always solve a technology problem. There will always be some really brilliant company that can solve the tech problem. The bigger issue, really twofold, how do you do it in such a fashion that the city's decision-making authority, mayor's office, city council, administrators of agencies, can recognize that the decisions that they're making on these tech investments are getting the goals achieved that they wanted to when they decided that this was the path they wanted to go. So how can we build measures and metrics for success? And what does success actually look like in a smart city environment? So that's one area of we're putting a lot of emphasis on. But it has to do, again, with collaboration and how we understand the perspectives between, for instance, the city council, the economic development authority, and the chamber of commerce, and the individual companies and nonprofits that make up a region, and hopefully with input from the universities and the community colleges where the workforce is coming from in the long run. So it's all about collaboration. And although I didn't use the word up until now, that is really, as I said, it's a national scale public-private partnership that what we're doing. And we hope to expand that definition more from the top down to local regional communities where I think collaboration is a lot easier because everybody knows everybody. And that's a key, that is a real key to success.
Thank you. I think we might have to run the mic back and forth because I just want to
I'm
make
sorry,
sure
yeah.
that everybody's able to
Yeah.
hear the
That's
panelists.
fine, I need to get the steps.
Okay. Was there another
Sorry
question?
about that.
Oh, yes, Tom.
I just wanted to chime in that I think collaboration for rural localities like Buena Vista is not just nice to have, but is essential. Is the only way that we're really going to move forward because, you know, when we talk about workforce and we talk about training, like I don't have, you know, technical expertise here. We don't have dedicated staff that can really be up to speed and honed in on implementation of these kinds of technologies. So I think where it would happen for us is collaboration with higher education, or with a nonprofit, or with a state agency. So, you know, I could really see some fruitful partnerships potentially with state agencies, and some of the ones that I work with, you know, like VDOT, or the Department of Housing and Community Development, where there's some sort of technical assistance program potentially, where they are able to partner with us, and test out or implement, you know, a program to tackle some targeted problem. You know, I can see that being a real path forward.
Well, and as from a community college, we are, I think our middle name is called collaboration. That's what we do. We collaborate with our business partners. We collaborate with our local school systems. And as I mentioned about MG Tech earlier, that is kind of like proof positive of collaboration. We've gone from a dual enrollment sort of model to now we are, you know, having even more collaboration with our local schools and bringing in students even earlier for tech education. And I'm just sitting here thinking how we have these three avenues at MG Tech, but now we can partner again and be like, have a smart city sort of pathway maybe in the future. So again, I think collaborating on all areas, that's just what we do in higher ed.
Thank you. Is there another question? Here.
Hi, I'm Doug Farrington, and I grew up farming in the Midwest and been in agriculture most of my life. I retired a couple of years ago from agriculture and started a clean tech company. So that's my background. My question to you, Mr. Dunaway, is, I've been I was the chairman of the board of Ag Gateway, which is a standards organization for ag.
Mhm.
You may know Evan Wallace in your organization, maybe.
I'm familiar with the name, but that's all I can
So
say.
we
Yeah.
worked with Evan Wallace at NIST for a number of years. I'm just wondering, when we're on the subject of collaboration, how do you guys collaborate? How does climate smart tie in with smart cities?
Yeah. Good.
Hold on one
Good.
second. We want to get the microphone back to you for your
A
answer.
critical question at
Okay.
the moment.
All right. Thank you.
So I mentioned earlier on that the whole, I got my start in the science and technology world thinking about community resilience. How do we build communities, excuse me, that are capable of managing the risks and the problems that we're facing in the future? But also now, how do we understand what those problems look like, and how do we expand our understanding so that we can advance, so that we can get ahead of the problem and begin doing the collaboration and the planning that is required in order to protect these communities? I think the whole climate change issue, boy, if we ever saw it, if you had any doubt about it before, what happened in North Carolina over the last 2 months has really, I think, shifted a lot of attitudes about what a hurricane means if you live in a mountain community. I mean, whoever thought that would be a problem? But it is, and so we're going to be seeing more of this. Unfortunately, the wildland fires in Lahaina, Maui. I don't know if you've ever been to Lahaina or so, but that's a huge loss of a very historic town, and they're even struggling with how to rebuild it. So I have a project that we're doing right now. We're in the process of writing up a workshop report on that. And it is, so some of you may be familiar with this, the Federal Emergency Management Agency has a program called the Whole Community Approach to Disaster Management, which has to do with how the federal government relates to communities, relates to states, regions, and communities, so that we can build an understanding from the federal level all the way down to the local level on how to protect our communities and build resilience in before we have to face the problems of a disaster that touches everybody. So I have a research project in NIST that we just completed the first step of, the first stage of it, and we held a workshop in Washington about a month ago to bring emergency managers, some folks at three research groups at universities, federal agencies, including Department of Homeland Security, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, the Cybersecurity Information and Security Administration, and interestingly, the Department of State, together along with smart city experts to talk about what a whole community approach to disaster management would really look like, and how would we build it, and how would we structure it. So we're working up the notes from about a two-day workshop right now. We've got about 40 pages of data that we're pulling together. And eventually we're going to have a workshop report that is going to lay out a path for how we need to be thinking about resilience and climate change and its impact on our communities, but also on our agriculture and food sources and our information technology architectures and infrastructures. All those dimensions into the future. So get ahead of the problem and think 10 years ahead of it to the degree that we can. So this is one thing in NIST that is not an area that you would think NIST, that the Department of Commerce would typically be involved in, but we are because of the commercial impact of these disasters right now, both the community and even at the family level, scaled all the way up to regional level. And we can anticipate what we're going to be dealing with in the future. So we're trying to solve that. So we are thinking about that. However, once that workshop report is completed, this will probably be February, March, I suspect, I will be very interested in sending it in your direction to get your perspective on how we could take that and then begin to build a whole community approach to resilience, to public safety and public health, as we saw in the COVID situation, which we need to focus on, But those kind of thoughts from the perspective of communities themselves. So that's a subject for a conversation at some time in the future.
Thank you. So we had another question. All right.
Hi, my name is Olivia Wright. I'm with Shenandoah Valley Partnership. We're a regional economic development organization. And my question is for Tamra specifically, but really if any of you have feedback. And it's something that I've been thinking about a lot, which is that we have, in the Shenandoah Valley, we have 10 universities and community colleges, but we're not retaining a lot of those who graduate. And I've been thinking about how we maintain our graduates who are starting these tech companies or cyber operations companies. So I guess my question is, and that will hopefully spark, local and regional innovation in this space. So if a company were looking at the Valley versus locating in Charlotte, like what is the value proposition, or how do we tell that story better? And I guess that's really for any of you, but Tamara, I'm curious.
We can just run the microphone back. Thank you. Thank you for your patience.
So yeah, that's a big question. A lot of my students have been fortunate to stay where they have been trained, but also I think just partnering with our local folks to make sure there are those remote opportunities to work somewhere for a larger company, but yet stay here at home. That can be a bonus, and that is why I think I focus more on cyber than any of the other avenues, which there's plenty of other ways to get into tech, but cyber seems to be the one. Well, one, there's just so many job opportunities, but it seems to be the one where they really kind of expect you to work more remotely. So, it's a hard question. We train tomorrow's workforce, but we don't know where that workforce is going to end up. So that's I don't think I have like the magic answer. I just have the thought that if we can kind of create this synergy with our local businesses to get our graduates to go there first, it at least gives them a really good start at home, and then they can there get their skills, to go to the next level, whether that next level is moving away, which I hope not, or it is a more remote opportunity with a larger organization, larger company. Does that kind of answer what you're asking? Okay.
And that's a great point, and I would add to that from a training perspective, a trend that I've seen is, and certainly there's been all kinds of virtual training out there. I've seen a trend in the actual labs, the mock-up labs that they can get from a technology perspective, growing by leaps and bounds. So before, where you could get to a certain point and then all of a sudden you had to be physically in a lab, and certainly there is still some of that, but it's shrinking now. And in fact, one of the major universities I work with, and this gentleman actually is in cybersecurity, so it's interesting. He's out in Christiansburg and works with OU. Talking with him, some of the training that he had early on, he was saying how it was limited and so forth, but just the access to the more skilled labs and things like that really assisted him, and I've had several tell me that as well.
Thank you.
Let me just add to that real quick.
So kind of add to that, so at our college, we offer our classes in HighFlex. So a student can be face-to-face, they could be asynchronously online or synchronously online, and we use a lot of labs, simulated labs and live labs through like the Virginia Cyber Range to bring real world training to our students. So when they do get to the workforce, they've worked on real equipment. They've also worked in simulated environments where it was safe to make a mistake. So yeah, I think training, you just hit on that, has come so far compared to like when I could first sell PC. Okay.
Not to pass pass the mic back to you.
Oh, no. I'm going to cut you off soon.
That's another great point. So David Raymond, I worked with quite a bit from the Virginia Cyber Range, and all of that. At least at the time, I worked directly with him on when I was with Amazon Web Services, and the driver there was, if you think about cybersecurity and some of the challenges that they have once, dragging cables and completely mocking up a lab with physical equipment. If you do that virtually, not only are you able to establish these environments more easily, but then you're not worried when viruses run amok and things like that. So it becomes so much simpler. So there's a lot like that now that is just becoming easier and allowing people to stay close to them.
Thank you. I wanted to take a minute to just go off script for a second and talk to the students that are here. First of all, if you haven't deduced this from the discussion, we want you. Do this, keep doing this, do more of this, meet people, see people that have lived this life and kind of, I guess, had the blessing of both ends of this rural lifestyle that's great. You can be on the Appalachian Trail the same day you've done your job. You take an hour break, you go out for your run on the trail, and it's beautiful. Lower cost of living, and you can still have all of these opportunities. So please do meet the people in the room, build those networks, and I would encourage all of the people in the room. We have to work hard to retain this talent. We have to get to know them. We have to support them, and we have to mentor them. So yes, curriculums and all these other things, but really it's a face-to-face and the relationships. We have to continue to build the opportunities, but I do commend you, the students that are here tonight. Thank you. I am going to invite Jeff up for a second because he wants to talk about broadband, rural broadband, which I know is really important to growth. And it's not a field that I would consider myself well versed in. So I'm going to recuse myself for a second.
So I'll start with a
Do you want that?
kind of a.
Do you want the thing? Okay. I'll run the mic.
Thank you. So I'll start with just a kind of quick discussion. I know very little about it. That might seem kind of funny if you know me. I work for AT&T. So you think that I might be aware of it. I know about it because I'm a capture manager for AT&T, so I'm a line and HD for stuff. I have to be for my job. So broadband is not something that I normally am involved in. However, I did do some checking, so I did try to do my homework before I came here tonight. So I have spoken to BARC representatives. Actually, I was talking to the CEO of BARC, and specifically asked him about broadband implementation here in the county and how close we were to finishing that up. And it's called commonly the last mile implementation. So that's a kind of a critical aspect, I believe, on what we're trying to do. If we were to look at, are any of the cities here within the county or even in the region going to become and introduce these types of smart technologies? At some point, we're going to have to get back to the connectivity issue. And the more of us citizens of the area that are connected using broadband, the better off we are for the implementation. In turn, I do believe it does position us well for these future technologies that are going to be developed and tried to be implemented to adjust to smart city type things. So I just wanted to read here what I got from Mr. Buchanan. He's the CEO over at BARC. So what I asked him was, I said, can you tell me where I can get a short summary of the last mile broadband rollout for the county? So he told me that the Rockbridge County Administrator, Spencer Suter, is someone that could actually tell us a little bit more, but BARC is pretty much done with what we were planning to build out. They have a very small VATI grant that they were just awarded to the country to cover some of the cost of doing drops in Buffalo Creek and Spring Valley areas, and also help with the full construction of the Conrock area. This may not mean anything to me, but it's how we have our areas divided up. And I know that Brightspeed and Verizon are also doing that. I don't want to say that word too loud. Also doing some builds in the county, but I don't have the details. We're also waiting to hear back from USDA on a Community Connect grant that would help build an area in the western part of the county. Originally, we planned on building out some additional areas. And Augusta, and Botetourt through an FCC, CAFII, and RDOF auction. But due to the construction, we returned those areas back to the FCC so they could be made available for upcoming BEAD funding. We were successful returning those areas and getting them eligible for BEAD. So we'll have to see who's the successful bidder once the process starts. So I just wanted to add that in. Ultimately, that leads me to a question, which is, I think that one of the ways that other communities have been able to implement some of the smart city technologies is through grants. I believe that's correct. And I know that there's a lot of involvement by many people in the room here in grants that have been done in the past, as well as things that we could do in the future to help fund some initiatives. And so is there any kind of recommendation you would give us, and I'll address this to you, Mr. Dunaway, to see if there was something that maybe it's in your lessons learned database about going after specific types of grants, both here at the local, regional level, and also at federal level. And maybe even something like SBIR, small business.
Yeah, right. Right. I was gonna.
And I would just
mention that.
turn that on. How would you turn this one on? Right here. I would just say too, with collaboration, is it better in approaching these types of grants that we're working together? So if you could just address that, please.
Yeah, so I can only offer a couple of examples because I don't work in this area specifically, and that alphabet soup of acronyms you just laid out there is not one I'm familiar with. Although I know a little bit about broadband access. So just a couple of ideas. One is the Economic Development Administration, and I'm sure, Olivia, you're probably tied in with EDA, I would suspect, sort of. You need to get tied in with the EDA, okay? So the Economic Development Administration sponsors cost share programs with local communities who identify needs for broadband, or any other thing for that matter, just at the community development level. And what the cost share is kind of a fungible issue. It changes depending on the urgency of the need, the economic viability of the community, meaning that in some communities that are underserved, they can get 100% support by EDA. Sometimes it's like 90% with a 10% cost share on the part of the community. It generally tends to break out, in my experience, about 60-40, something like that. EDA will fund as much as 60%. The community has to put up 40%. But when you're talking about broadband access and whatnot, 60% federal funding for something like that's pretty significant. So that's an area that I'm at least a little bit familiar with that you can look into. The other one I would recommend, so the Federal Emergency Management Agency has and I ought to know the acronym, but I don't. It's a community block grant process in which you can apply for areas that are going to build resilience, build disaster preparedness, build infrastructure resilience as well. And those can go to things like building 5G wireless access for communities so that they have emergency access as viewed from the perspective of their first responders and from their emergency managers. But of course, everybody benefits from that. Mm-hmm. So you might look at it's the community, it's CBG, it's Community Block Grant process under the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Okay, so those are two that I'm fairly familiar with. Here's another idea. Okay, so, and this is a different kind of a lift, but it works. So I used to run a research center at the University of Louisiana in Lafayette, Louisiana. It's in middle of Cajun country. But Lafayette had a problem. Now this is going back about 12 years ago. They couldn't get the telecom industry to run fiber optic cable to the city because it was so remote and the population was so small, the telecom simply wouldn't serve the area. So what they did is they floated a bond and they bought their own cable and they had it installed in a ring around the city. And all of a sudden, Lafayette, Louisiana has one of the most advanced, at that time now I'm speaking past tense, had one of the most advanced fiber optic networks in the entire country with universal, it was 4G at the time, it's probably 5G now, universal access across the entire city. You could walk out and sit on a park bench and get connected in with a 5G network. And they did that because they knew if they did it, A, they would own it, they would have control over it, their community itself would be able to serve community needs first as a priority, and that then they could connect with the telecom linkages at the time that it was right to do so. And so the telecom industry suddenly realized they had lost out on a huge market space, and now I think that has advanced way past that process. That's a recommendation that you ought to look at. And the city of Lafayette, Louisiana is the one that did that, launched that model. I'm sure it's done in a number of other communities as well. It isn't cheap, but it is an investment for the long run. So it's a really good model to think about as a community endeavor and a business model for advancing technologies and access across an entire region. So I'll just put that one out there as well. And maybe that's one that somebody else would want to comment.
We have time for one more question, if there is one, and then we're gonna feed you and let you guys have personal conversations. So, okay, yes.
Sorry. Hello, my name is Tom. I'm starting a small business, and I was a process engineer at a paper mill in Covington. I developed some smart application for process improvement. I have a question to Mr. Dunaway or the panel. How, if I want some comments on how that a smart city can incorporate or you take advantage of the large language model.
Okay, if we can get the mic back to the panel, please. Thank you so much, Tom. Who would like to take that?
I can make
Okay.
I can make a comment on
Great,
it.
thank you.
So are you familiar? So I'm going to talk about another nonprofit in tech world right now. The International Council on Systems Engineering. INCOSE, it's called. It's an international organization. I belong to INCOSE. It's like IEEE, but it's for systems engineering. So process engineering is a lot of what they do. That's an organization in which you can connect up with them. And if you send me an email, I can connect you in with the folks that do this. They do process engineering for things like paper. Paper mill is a really good example. But advanced manufacturing, three-dimensional additive manufacturing, that's an area that's in that space also. So those kinds of industrial processes is what they specialize in. I'd be glad to connect you up with the folks that work in those areas, and it might be helpful.
Thank you. Did anybody else want to comment on that? Yes.
I just want a closing remark for me. So as I mentioned, you invited me down here to hear what my agency is doing. I came to learn from you. So this has been really valuable for me. And I want to applaud AFCEA and the county regions across the board and the nonprofits and also VMI. And I'm very interested in where the next generation tells us we should go. Because my biggest liability, quite frankly, is that I'm too old for this job at this stage. We need to have young folks with new vision who think about problems in a way that I can't even envision, can't even imagine right now, and are going to be dealing with technologies already at this level that are on the cutting edge of what everybody else is doing, even in my agency in some respects. So I applaud you all being here, and I'm really glad you're here, and glad we had some community college representation as well. So thank you all for the opportunity to join you this evening.